In this session, we'll be talking about how the stress testing mechanisms which are followed by the various banks and financial institutions started converging over a period of time, and what are the kind of consequences that are associated with that convergence. So, as a part of the agenda, we will first look at how the trends are being observed as a part of the stress testing and capital management, right from the SCAP program, Supervisory Capital Adequacy Program, introduced by the Fed in 2009, to the CCARs that have been evolving, let's say up to 2015, 13, 14, 15, the comprehensive capital analysis and review. So, which has been happening right from right over to 13, 14, 15. What are the different kinds of trends that are observed in the world of stress testing and capital management? How these practices are getting converged, right, as a part of the observations of these programs. What are the observations that they have done with respect to the stress testing practices that have been followed by the banks, capital management practices followed by the banks, and how they are getting converged, and the different capital adequacy reviews, comprehensive capital analysis and review programs that are run by the Fed. What is their approach towards capital management? How it has been changing over the period? What are the different factors that needs to be considered to manage capital effectively? And finally, now that we are seeing that the stress testing results of the different organizations are getting converged, what are the consequences of that? Now, just looking at how the trends have been evolving with respect to the stress testing right from 2009 to 2015, from SCAP program to CCAR programs. So, nowadays there is an increasingly aggressive capital management. So, whatever the capital analysis and review program that has been done, the initial response to those reviews is every bank started looking at maintaining wide capital cushion. So, though there was a regulatory minimum that was set, every bank had a very stringent process where it started keeping a very high, wide capital cushion. So, which resulted in they being more and more cautious, responding to the CCAR, and they are managing their capital more and more tightly. That is what was the initial trend. They were very, very aggressively managing the capital, which means they are put lot of tight processes and practices in place. And over a period, by doing this kind of enhanced financial resources management, enhanced capital management processes in place, the stress testing results that are executed by almost all the banks and financial institutions, they began more and more stabilizing and converging. So based on this, most of the institutions are able to better estimate the results, and which had helped them gain some kind of an edge over the capital management process. But what has to be understood is, now when all the banks and financial institutions are maintaining more or less similar kind of a results, there are some unintended consequences that are going to come up. Now overall it looks like there is a predictability associated with the results. So the stress testing models that have been initiated by the Fed, they are driving the fate of the financial system, right? So there is so on one side the banks are typically not able to innovate, come out with exclusive ways in which the stress testing can be executed, capital management be done. So the entire US financial system at one point in time looks as if it is heavily undercapitalized, because every bank and financial institution is maintaining a buffer which is much above compared to the regulatory minimums. So if that kind of aggressive attitude exists, at some point it looks like the whole financial system is undercapitalized. But on the other side, if the entire scenario is very conservative, then the efficiency of the financial system itself would get questioned. So that is the kind of an unintended consequence that can come out if the results converge, if almost every bank and financial institution follow the similar kind of stress testing practices and capital management practices across. Now, if I look at the 2013 CCAR versus 2014 capital adequacy, capital analysis and review, and 15 over a period, there are different versions of capital analysis and review that have been performed, and in all of them, the approach towards the capital management has been gradually changing. So initially, there is a lot of conservative outlook, means we have to maintain a large amount of capital compared to the regulatory minimum. So capital cushions were much wider. So because of that, the capital has started increasing, leverage ratios started increasing. So the stress testing is getting more and more matured, and as a result of this, the results that are coming out of the stress testing at different points in time, they started stabilizing. Almost all the results started converging. So the capital ratios of all the institutions are coming closer and closer to the regulatory minimum. That's the kind of a change that we have observed over the past 3 different CCAR reviews that have typically occurred. So initially, there is a lot of flexibility around the capital because there is a lot of wide cushions that have been set. The risk appetite of the institutions gradually changed and aligned towards the stress testing practices, and the constraints around the non-stress capital also started picking up. All these things have changed the attitude towards the capital management right throughout each of the comprehensive capital analysis and review programs. Now, if I look at the broad factors that are playing a role in terms of managing the capital, there are market rewards for distribution of the capital. Right? So, every shareholder, analyst, they have a desire for the capital return. So the response is very aggressive. The market rewards for the capital distribution says that the response need to be more aggressive towards the shareholders' desire, towards the analyst desire for the performance of the company. But on the other side, if a failure occurs, there are a lot of case studies that they have come across that a failure occurs, the cost of failure is going to be so high, it's better to remain conservative with respect to the regulatory minimum. So it's a kind of a trade-off or a balancing between the desire for capital returns versus the being conservative with respect to the regulatory minimum. And over a period, we have been observing that the CCAR results are more and more stabilized, whether it is the PPNR or the balance sheet or the risk-weighted asset projections. All of them are getting more and more stabilized, and that stability is occurring across the aggregate level, and even the stressed capital consumption projections are becoming more and more stable, and the capital erosion, especially projected by the Fed due to the stress, are much higher compared to what the bank projections are. And because of that, the Fed is exerting more and more downward pressure on the stress capital ratios. And overall, it may look like the banking holding companies models, they become more overly aggressive, where they are maintaining a wider capital cushions compared to that of the regulatory minimum. as a result of the convergence of all these results, we see that a lot of unintended consequences. There is a possibility of a systemic risk, because if one practice is observed by one bank and another by another, there is a possibility of a diversification in the processes that they have followed. But if all of them follow a similar kind of a process, all of them lead to a similar kind of a result, that is where the systemic risk is very much possible. So, and at the same time, the models that have been implemented by the Fed, they are becoming the biggest drivers. So the bank's innovativeness, creativity in terms of coming out with the different kinds of models is getting hampered by a large extent. So the entire industry, this is what is not good. The entire industry relying on the same risk infrastructure, which means all the goods and the bads are equal across all the companies in the industry. So one weakness, one vulnerability that attacks one company will have a ripple effect on the other companies also. That's where we are projecting the systemic risk. So at a point in time, we will definitely see that the entire financial system is getting heavily undercapitalized. But at the same time, if the risk infrastructure of the Fed is conservative instead of being aggressive, then it will question the efficiency of the entire financial system itself. So what needs to be done? The model development, it can't be one single model implemented by all the institutions. There should be creativity in the model development. There should be independence. It has to be specific to each of the institutions. There needs to be alternative forecasting mechanisms, and there should be a real challenge to the internal forecasts as well as the forecasts that are done by the Fed. That kind of a process needs to be developed. So the risk management of the model itself, what is the goodness of the model? What is the chance that the model risk is much higher? So there should be a proper plan and a process in place to handle the model risk. The policies need to be very much robust. Every organization needs to have a risk appetite statement suiting towards the actual risk appetite of the bank, and the frameworks which bring in the risk limits. So there should be very effective and robust capital management tools. There should be good stress testing practices. The models need to be more customized to the requirement. There should be reverse stress testing, economic capital. All these things need to be very much strongly linked with the process of stress testing implemented by the regulators. So all these things probably put in place, probably evaluated, are going to improve the entire banking and financial system per se. So that is what I wanted to summarize this article on stress testing convergence and what are the consequences of it. So we discussed about the evaluation of the trends in stress testing and capital management. How did the approach towards the capital management change over the different CCAR programs? Then what are the factors that are playing a role in terms of managing the capital, and what are the various consequences as a result of the convergence of stress test results? Thanks a lot for listening to this video. If you have any further queries, you can get back to me by calling on the number given below or sending an email to the email address given below. Thank you very much.